What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show. But is that the case in both U.S. law and Ecuadorian law? That's going to be important later.
Yes.
It's the same?
Yes.
Okay. Hey guys, if you have a second, please be sure to share this episode around on social media and with your friends, whether it's Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter. It's all a huge help. It gets new eyeballs on the show, and it allows us to grow and survive. So thank you to all of you who have already been doing that, and thank you to all of you who are going to do so now. All right, so how long was that trip in 93 when you went down? How long were you there?
It was 7 to 10 days or so. I don't remember exactly.
By the time you left, did you grasp the, maybe not that this was going to be a 30-year odyssey, but did you grasp that this was going to become a main focus that was going to be a tough battle for you, or was it still preliminary, like, okay, this is a disaster, let's see how we're going to help and figure it out from there?
It was more the latter. I mean, look, the trip ended up changing my life in profound ways, but at the time I didn't know how that would play out or even if it would happen. So okay. like after that first trip, I was appalled. Like the others on the trip, we wanted to do something to help the people and to hold Chevron accountable. So when we got back, we decided to do a lawsuit, and we organized a legal team, got some funding. I was very young at the time. I hadn't practiced law for more than a year, and there were others involved who had much more experience than I as lawyers, and we hooked up with them, and we designed a case and, wrote up a lawsuit and filed it, I think, about 6 months after this trip. It's pretty fast.
Where'd you file it?
We filed it right here in New York City in Manhattan.
Okay. And
the reason we filed it, by the way, in New York City, if people understand, is that Texaco's headquarters at the time, remember Chevron did not buy Texaco until 2001.
Yep.
We filed this in 1993. So at that time, Texaco's headquarters were right here in New York, in actually White Plains, New York, right nearby Manhattan. And like the goal of the people of Ecuador who were affected was like, let's file in the United States where they are. I mean, all the decisions to pollute in Ecuador were made here in New York. And that's kind of one of the ironies of this. So while the problem manifested in Ecuador, the actual crime or the wrongdoing happened here.
Yeah.
And also the people of Ecuador didn't trust their own legal system at the time. In other words—
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, here's a company that had been dumping openly, systematically, methodically with impunity for, 25 plus years, and they didn't have to pay $1 in damages. It wasn't a single case. So they're like, let's sue them up there. And we hope to get a jury trial. And that began a whole 10-year period, that is from the early 90s to 2001, where Texaco, then Chevron, fought tenaciously to block the ability of the Ecuadorian people, the indigenous people, to get into the courthouse, to have a case done in U.S. courts, because they were absolutely terrified that a jury in the United States would find against them and order them to pay. And it would also obviously generate a lot of bad publicity. So their first line of defense was to kick the case out of U.S. courts, move it down to Ecuador, where they had operated, dumped, polluted all these years, never paid $1. So they thought by moving it to Ecuador, they could essentially obtain impunity, avoid accountability, just because of their influence over Ecuador's courts. And it didn't work out too well for them.
So I don't expect you to remember like exact numbers on stuff, but just ballparking it to give it some scope. I have a few questions about the stretch of this. Like, we saw the size of the land where they were doing this, and obviously a lot of people are affected. But like ballpark, how many quote unquote potential victims were you filing that class action on behalf of? Okay,
so when we first started, we estimated it to be 30,000 people.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. But that was in 1993. There's been a huge population influx since then. And it's, we think it's a lot higher than that now, maybe 100,000 people.
So also at that time, and again, this might have changed too, I don't know if it was from the first trip or specifically on the research afterwards in the build up to actually filing the lawsuit, were you able to get data to show, for example, some of the carcinogenic effects on health or deaths that had happened? I mean, it had been 26 years since this started. So did you have data to already show that this had impacted the life expectancy of the region?
The answer is yes, and we got that a number of ways. One is the doctors that came down on that first trip took did a lot of sampling and were able to produce independent lab results that showed high levels of cancer-causing toxins in the waters that people were drinking out of, next to these oil pits. And then also there was a doctor down there from Spain, Miguel San Sebastian, who, independent of all of our activities, was doing his own research. And he produced in the 1990s a number of reports that confirmed extremely high cancer rates in these areas where the pollution was occurring. So we had a lot of data to work with, and we also had a ton of anecdotal individual testimonies from people who lived there that they were sick. And there's also data kept there's a national cancer registry in Ecuador, and we had access to some of that data, which was very disturbing. But, all of this goes to say, you can't necessarily prove X person's cancer was caused by this well. It's complicated. But if you look at the overall data and saw the dramatic increase in cancer rates in this region where Chevron was operating, you see there's got to be some sort of connection. So we had data to begin with that we could use to assert in the initial lawsuit that there was a real health problem caused by these reckless drilling practices.
Okay. Now we're going to take this as much in order as we can because, like we said at the outset, this is like a 30-year story, so there's a lot that happens on the way. But not to bury the lead here for people who are not familiar with your story, this ends, or at least is up to the point now where you ended up having to do basically more than 2 years on house arrest due to a contempt of court charge after a whole litany of things involving different cases that were brought against you where Chevron's money was involved in improper places within those cases. So this gets to, it starts with and continues to be the main story that we have all these victims from a completely unrepresented area pretty much that you're trying to fight for. And then it also unfortunately adds a second element to it where it's like this attack on Steve Donziger for shaking the tree to try to help these people. So back to when you first filed that lawsuit. I'm not totally familiar with all the legal processes. I hear stories all the time where a big lawsuit gets filed, it gets dismissed by a judge, or it says it's allowed to go to trial or whatever. What did the judge say right away this is allowed to go to trial? Like what was the process and how did, at the time, Texaco respond to this? What were your dealings with them at the beginning?
So, okay, this is interesting. At the very beginning in 1993 when it started, they hired a big gun law firm, corporate law firm called King and Spalding, which is based in Atlanta. Specifically a former United States Attorney General under the administration of Jimmy Carter. Goes probably way before y'all's time, but I remember these years.
I know Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
He might be dead by the time this comes out. But
in any event, Jimmy Carter had an attorney general by the name of Griffin Bell, who, after Jimmy Carter left office, became a partner in King and Spalding, this law firm. And Chevron hired Griffin Bell to lead the effort to beat back our case, which, by the way, I took as a compliment, because clearly they were taking this very seriously from the get-go. And when we filed the lawsuit on November 3rd, 1993, it was reported on the national network news on CBS with Dan Rather as the anchor. Now, that might not mean much to your audience, but back in the early 90s, really pre-internet, all people did at night from 6:30 to 7 was watch either NBC, ABC, or CBS. You can still get these shows now. They have a much lower audience. But it was.
You ever heard of those, Alessi?
Yes, I did.
You ever heard of a guy named Walter Cronkite?
Yes,
actually. Look at the top picture on the far wall.
That's good. There. He was the closest thing to God in America for many years when I was growing up. But in any event, it was covered on CBS Evening News the day it was filed, and it immediately sent shockwaves through the fossil fuel industry, through Texaco, that a group of indigenous people could somehow hook up with, lawyers in the United States who knew what they were doing to file a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit for damages over pollution caused in Ecuador that Texaco never thought anyone would even think about at the time they did it. So I think it sent shockwaves, and they responded with a tremendous amount of hostility and investment of resources and lawyers to try to get the case dismissed.
Now, what's your role on this? You're one of the attorneys filing it, but how many of you guys did it? Did you have a main law firm behind it? Because you're very early in your career at this point, as you said.
And also I had another job. I was working full-time as a public defender representing juveniles accused of crimes in Washington, D.C. So I did this on my vacation in my spare time. So the reality was I was a very kind of subordinate, low-level player on the legal team. There were more experienced lawyers, but I was definitely on signing as a lawyer on the original lawsuit. I think I was one of 3 or 5 people at the time, and I'm literally the only one left working on it.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.